I went to the airport with my daughter-in-law and my grandson to welcome my son, who was finally coming home after a year of working abroad. We had been waiting for a long time, watching the flight board until the status changed to landed, and my heart filled with excitement and nervous joy. My grandson squeezed my hand, smiling as he imagined seeing his father again. Suddenly, my daughter-in-law said she needed to step into the restroom and walked away in a hurry. A few minutes later, a security officer approached me and asked calmly, "Ma'am, where is the woman who was with you?" Confused, I replied that she had gone to the restroom, but before I could say more, I heard a firm voice crackle through his radio saying she had run toward the exit and that security teams were moving in. My body froze as panic set in and I quickly tried calling her, but her phone was already switched off. Within minutes, the arrivals area became tense and crowded, officers moving quickly while travelers looked around in confusion. The sounds of the busy airport faded for me, replaced by a deep sense of worry as I realized something was very wrong, all while knowing my son was about to walk through those doors. Unaware that everything around us had suddenly changed, he avoided looking straight at me, scanning the surroundings first before leaning closer and asking in a low voice a question that caught me off guard. "Ma'am, where is the woman who was with you?" Startled, I instinctively pointed toward the restroom area and replied that my daughter-in-law had gone there just moments ago. Before I could add anything else, his radio crackled sharply, and a firm voice cut through the noise of the terminal, saying she had run toward Gate G and that the area needed to be secured. The officer's expression changed instantly, his calm replaced by visible tension as he studied me closely, making my stomach tighten with fear. Unsure of what was happening, I hurriedly called Nia's phone, but it rang once and went silent, as if it had been turned off without warning. My pulse raced as uniformed personnel moved quickly across the terminal, positioning themselves throughout the waiting area, causing travelers to whisper, step back, and glance around nervously. I pulled my grandson close, holding him tightly as he grew frightened and pressed his face against me. In the middle of the confusion, my son suddenly appeared through the arrivals doors, looking tired but smiling brightly as he pushed his luggage and searched the crowd. When he spotted us, his face lit up and he raised his hand, walking toward us with excitement. But just as he came close, officials stepped in from both sides and stopped him, asking his name in a firm tone. Confused, he nodded and answered, clearly not understanding what was happening. Moments later, he was gently restrained, the small gift he carried falling to the floor as the busy terminal went completely silent around us, leaving me frozen in shock as everything changed in an instant. I shouted in panic, my thoughts completely scattered as I pulled Galani close to me while he cried uncontrollably and tried to rush toward my son, begging them to release him and insisting they had made a terrible mistake. Quasi was in shock, struggling uselessly as fear spread across his face, his voice breaking as he kept asking what he had done and why this was happening. A large officer stepped in front of me and firmly held me back, his tone calm and flat as he told me to stay composed and explained that my son was being taken in due to a serious international investigation and that I would need to provide a formal statement. My ears buzzed as if the world had gone silent, and the happiness of the reunion we had waited for vanished in seconds. I stood helpless as they led my son away, his hands restrained behind him, while flashes from phones and curious stares followed every step. Instead of questioning me right away, they brought Galani and me into a small, sterile waiting room, clearly meant for delicate situations. My grandson shook in my arms, unable to stop crying, and I forced myself to stay calm for his sake. With trembling fingers, I called my cousin Vera in Atlanta, my voice barely recognizable as I begged her to come immediately, take Galani and help us. She arrived quickly, pale but steady, asking no questions as she reached for my grandson. Letting go of him felt unbearable as he clung to me, crying for his parents, his voice echoing down the hallway as Vera carried him away. When the doors closed behind them, the silence felt crushing. The drive to the station passed without a word, and when we arrived, I was led through a long, brightly lit corridor that smelled of disinfectant and old paper, marking the moment I realized my life had shifted into something I could never have prepared for. That I sat stiffly on a hard plastic chair facing the gray steel door of the interrogation room, its silence heavy and unforgiving, as if it were sealing both my son and the truth behind it. A young female officer approached and gently handed me a cup of water, compassion evident in her eyes, and I nodded in quiet gratitude, though my numb fingers could barely hold the cup and I couldn't bring myself to drink. My throat burned, but it wasn't water I needed, it was answers. To keep myself from breaking under the weight of fear, I forced my mind to stay busy, retracing every step that had led us here. I am Odora Vance, a retired literature teacher widowed for 10 years, and since my husband's passing my entire world had narrowed to my son Kwesi and my grandson Galani. Kwesi was an honest, gifted carpenter, kind-hearted to a fault, and his wife Nia Imani had seemed like a blessing sent to protect us both. I remembered clearly the day my son, glowing with hope, told us about a promising job opportunity with a large furniture company in London, and how quickly Nia embraced the idea, wrapping her arms around him and assuring me with a confident smile that she would care for Galani and me while he was away. For more than a year she kept that promise flawlessly, tending to me with devotion, managing every detail of Galani's days, and growing her artisan business until it became the pride of our family. Yet now, in that sterile hallway, memories I had once dismissed as harmless resurfaced with frightening clarity. The nights when insomnia kept me awake and I heard the balcony door slide open, Nia stepping outside to whisper urgently into her phone, her voice so low it barely carried. The time a cold breeze nudged my bedroom door open just enough for me to catch fragments of a conversation, words that didn't sound like business at all, and which I had foolishly chosen to ignore. At the time I had brushed it off, telling myself that phrases like package clean were simply business terms beyond my understanding, but soon after unsettling changes began to appear. First a designer handbag that cost more than my monthly pension, then outrageously expensive sunglasses followed by the latest model phone. Each time I asked, Nia Imani answered with that same radiant, disarming smile that erased all suspicion, insisting the items were bonuses from her company for completing special projects, even draping a luxurious silk scarf around my shoulders and telling me I deserved it. Now remembering those moments sends chills through me. But the clearest and most devastating memory crashed back with merciless force. An autumn afternoon 3 months earlier when I was watering my geraniums in the hallway outside her home office and the door was left slightly ajar. Through it I heard her voice plainly, cold, sharp and calculating, nothing like the woman I thought I knew, saying, "No, you can't use my account. It's too risky. Use Kwesi's. He's in London. He won't find out. The money will look cleaner that way." That word, cleaner, pierced me like a blade. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the watering can, and for a moment I stood frozen, ready to knock, to confront her, to demand the truth. But I didn't. Cowardice wrapped itself around my resolve and I convinced myself it must be something technical. Taxes, paperwork, work matters I was too old to understand. I told myself I had no right to accuse her, that I didn't want to disrupt the fragile harmony of our family, and so I walked away in silence, pretending I had heard nothing. Sitting now in that hard plastic chair, the relentless ticking of the hallway clock echoing like a countdown, remorse crushed my chest until breathing became painful. It wasn't that I hadn't known. It was that I had chosen not to know, closing my eyes and ears to every warning sign to preserve a comforting illusion, and now my son was paying the price for my fear. Nearly 3 hours passed in numb stillness before a sharp click shattered the silence and the gray interrogation room door finally opened. But it wasn't Kwesi who emerged. Instead, a man in his 50s stepped out, impeccably dressed in an elegant suit, salt and pepper hair perfectly combed, his sharp, assessing gaze carrying the weight of someone accustomed to handling dark truths. He was nothing like the uniformed officers I'd seen before. "Mrs. Vance," he said calmly. I nodded without thinking. "I'm Detective Thorne, the lead investigator on this case." He didn't say another word in the hallway, only gestured for me to follow him into a small nearby office that looked out onto a dull gray courtyard. The room was neat and quiet, and on the dark wooden desk lay a thick folder with a white label bearing just 2 words, Kwi Vance. My chest tightened instantly. Detective Thorne wasted no time on small talk. He sat down, opened the file and turned it toward me. The first page showed a complex diagram filled with boxes, lines and figures, tangled together like a web, with my son's name sitting in the center. Calmly pointing to it, he explained that over the past 14 months, a bank account registered in my son's name had received more than $2 million from dozens of accounts spread across the United States and Europe. The number hit me like a physical blow, leaving me stunned and speechless. He flipped to another page and continued, explaining that the money had been moved almost immediately to offshore accounts, following a pattern commonly used to hide illegal funds. I stood up suddenly, gripping the edge of the desk to steady myself, my voice shaking as I insisted there had to be a mistake. My son worked with wood and tools, not numbers and transfers, and barely understood modern banking systems. Detective Thorne listened patiently but explained that every document, every authorization, pointed to the same conclusion, then showed me a scanned contract and asked if I recognized the signature. I did instantly. It was unmistakably my son's. The sight drained all strength from me and I sank back into the chair, feeling empty and helpless. Desperate, I asked to see him even if only for a few minutes, needing to hear the truth from his own lips. After a brief pause, the detective agreed. I was led through cold corridors into a stark room with a metal table and 2 chairs, guarded from outside. When I stepped inside, Kwesi looked up at me and in that moment, my heart broke all over again. His face looked washed of all color, his eyes swollen and tired, and the neat clothes he had proudly worn to reunite with us were now creased and careless. I sat across from him, my hands shaking as I held his, feeling how cold they were. I quietly asked him to tell me the truth and after a long pause he finally spoke her name, Nia Imani, his voice breaking with guilt. He explained that she had asked him to help open a business account for what she claimed was a new craft venture, something about importing materials, words he never fully understood. The day before his flight she rushed him through paperwork at a cafe, urging him to sign quickly because everything had to be ready immediately. He admitted he barely read anything, trusting her completely and believing he was supporting her dreams. His shoulders slumped as he confessed that he signed wherever she pointed, without realizing the consequences. In that moment, it became painfully clear that his trust had been used against him, turning him into a shield for actions he never intended. Suddenly, the door opened and Detective Thorne stepped in, his tone firm as he said our time was over. He informed me that Nia had been identified as the main organizer behind the operation and had planned her escape in advance. Every record, every transfer had been placed under my son's name, leaving him trapped while she disappeared. The words settled heavily in the room, ending any small hope I still held and leaving only the weight of a truth that could not be undone. My son, Kwesi Vance, was formally listed for financial crimes and labeled as part of an international scheme. And in that moment I understood the cruel truth that he had been chosen as the easy one to blame. An officer calmly helped him to his feet and he followed without protest, moving slowly like someone whose strength had drained away. Before leaving the room he turned to look at me one last time, and in his eyes there was no anger, only deep hopelessness that broke my heart. I walked out of the station as evening fell, watching cars pass and people live their normal lives while mine felt completely shattered. The very next morning I searched for legal help, believing it was my last chance. I met Mr. Sterling, a kind attorney recommended by a friend, who listened carefully in his warm, book-filled office. But the moment he read the case papers his expression changed. He gently explained that the evidence was too strong and my son's signature appeared everywhere, making any defense nearly impossible. I didn't stop there and went from office to office, but each lawyer gave me the same answer. Some softly, others bluntly, saying my son looked like the perfect person to blame and no jury would believe his innocence. By the time I returned home that night, every bit of hope felt drained and when I opened the door, I was met only by a heavy, frightening silence that filled every corner of the house. The home that Nia Imani and I once built together suddenly felt unfamiliar and lifeless, as if all warmth had been drained from it overnight. On the living room table, Galani's handmade cardboard sign still lay there, proudly painted with bright colors and the words, "Welcome home, Daddy," which now felt painfully ironic and heartbreaking. I sank onto the sofa, staring at my notebook filled with names of law offices, every single one crossed out in anger and despair, knowing my last bit of hope was fading fast. Just then the doorbell rang, sharp and relentless, and though I wanted to ignore it, it kept ringing until I forced myself to answer. Standing there was a woman in her 40s, dressed simply in jeans and a shirt, her hair neatly tied back, but her sharp, focused eyes immediately caught my attention. She introduced herself as Detective Zuri Banks from the Cybercrimes Unit and explained she had been tracking Nia Imani for a long time, which made my heart skip. I invited her inside and we sat near Galani's sign as she gently asked about my son. His habits, his work, his nature. Not like an officer questioning a suspect, but like someone trying to understand him as a person. Once I felt calmer, she spoke plainly and explained that real criminals often hide behind honest, trusting people with clean records and little financial knowledge, and my son fit that role exactly. Looking me straight in the eyes, she said she believed Queasy was innocent, but belief alone meant nothing without solid evidence, and proof was the only way to save him. For the first time in 2 long days, a small and fragile sense of hope broke through the heavy darkness around me. I asked what we could possibly do now, since Nia Imani had disappeared and seemed to have erased every trace of herself. Detective Zuri answered with calm confidence, explaining that people like Nia are often careless in their pride, believing they are smarter than everyone else, and that they almost always leave something behind in the place they trust the most, this very house. She carefully scanned the living room like someone reading a hidden story in plain sight and admitted she couldn't request an official warrant because all surface evidence pointed to my son. Still, with my permission, she said we could quietly look for the truth ourselves. When she spoke the words "justice for Qui," something inside me came alive again, and without hesitation I agreed to help. She asked if there was a space Nia treated as strictly hers, somewhere even I rarely entered, and I immediately mentioned her home office, a room she always kept locked and guarded closely. Zuri gave a knowing nod and said that would be our starting point. I led her down the hallway to the office door, which was locked as always, and when the handle wouldn't budge, she calmly took out a small kit of tools and explained that sometimes justice hides behind closed doors. In less than a minute, with a quiet click, the lock gave way, and as the door slowly opened, I followed her inside, my heart racing with fear and hope mixed together. A cool, crisp breeze carrying the scent of fresh paper and a faint perfume of expensive air freshener greeted us as we stepped inside. The room reflected Nia Imani's obsession with control. Everything was unervingly precise, from the spotless walnut desk to the laptop closed perfectly, to the books aligned by spine color from white to black, like a colorless rainbow. The stark order felt almost cruel against the chaos in my life, sending a chill down my spine. Zuri put on rubber gloves and handed me a pair, urging me to trust my instincts. "You know this house," she said. "Look for anything unusual, anything that doesn't belong." We began searching silently. I examined the shelves book by book, hoping for a hidden clue, maybe a memory card or a note, but found nothing. Zuri focused on the desk, opening drawers with methodical precision. One held luxury pens and branded notepads, another neat stacks of contracts and legal documents, the perfect illusion of a successful career. I turned to the white steel filing cabinet in the corner. The top drawer contained only leather-bound photo albums, which I opened with trembling hands. Inside were pictures of Quasi and Nia at their wedding, Quasi's bright smile now painfully ironic, and images of tiny Galani in his mother's arms, memories Nia had preserved meticulously, whether out of care or cunning. Zuri's voice cut through my thoughts. She was at the bottom desk drawer, tapping it lightly. The sound was denser, heavier than expected. Using a thin tool, she lifted the pressed wood bottom, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside sat a small black velvet bag. My heart pounded as she emptied it on the table. One by one, 5 cheap mobile phones fell out. Simple devices with no internet, only capable of making calls. The sight of them made my stomach twist. This was no ordinary discovery, it felt like the first thread in unraveling a nightmare. These were the kind of basic phones often used for secret dealings and then thrown away, and beside them were dozens of SIM cards neatly sealed in small plastic bags. Each bag was labeled in Nia Imani's tidy handwriting with country names like Germany, France, England, and Italy, along with 2 identical black leather notebooks. My hands shook as I opened one notebook and saw a carefully written list of names, each followed by an age and country, all elderly people living alone, and long strings of numbers that clearly meant money trails. Zuri leaned in, her expression turning firm and serious, and explained that this was likely a list of people who had been targeted, with details of funds connected to them. As she reached for the second notebook, a thick envelope slipped out and fell to the floor. Inside were photos, not family pictures, but images of Nia dressed elegantly in luxury hotels, smiling and shaking hands with unfamiliar men. One photo stopped me cold. Nia stood beside a man whose face I recognized from the news, someone known internationally for major financial crimes. Zuri studied the image closely and said this discovery proved Nia was not just involved, but deeply connected and influential within a large operation. She carefully sealed everything we found into evidence bags and told me her team would examine the phones and cards right away. Before leaving, she warned me to act normal and stay quiet for my own safety. When the door closed behind her, I stood alone in that spotless room, feeling sick at the betrayal but also relieved, because for the first time, there was real proof and a chance to fight back. I carefully put the room back the way it had been, sliding the drawer base into place, straightening the books and making sure nothing looked disturbed, even though touching those costly items made my stomach turn knowing how that money was taken from vulnerable people. When I finished, I stepped onto the front porch to breathe, hoping the cool evening air would clear the heavy feeling inside me, but my heart still felt tight and cold. That was when I noticed my longtime neighbor, Mrs. Opaline Chesterton, watering her flowers across the way, and the moment she saw me, she rushed over with worry written all over her face. She told me the whole neighborhood was talking and gently asked what had happened to Kwesi after seeing a police car earlier that day. Her kindness broke the strength I was holding on to, and I ended up telling her everything about my son's arrest and my fear for his future, leaving out only the part about the quiet investigation. She listened without interrupting, softly comforting me, then grew serious and leaned closer. In a hushed voice, she shared something that made my heart race, explaining that 2 weeks earlier late at night, she had seen Nia near the gate speaking with a tall man who had a long scar on his cheek. The moment she said that, my breath caught because I knew she was describing the same man from the photographs, and I realized this small detail could change everything. Mrs. Opaline went on, her voice steady but full of concern. She remembered that Nia and the man were speaking quietly, yet because the street was so silent that early in the morning, she had caught a few words. She saw Nia hand him a thick envelope and say, "The package for Frankfurt." The man nodded and said something that had stuck with her. "The widow from Detroit is already clean." At the time it had seemed odd and she forgot about it, but now hearing her story again the meaning hit me. "The widow from Detroit, clean," I murmured. It had to be code. The widow was a victim and clean meant the deception had been completed. My heart raced. I realized we had a witness, someone who could confirm Nia's connection to the fugitive criminal. This could be the proof to show Kwesi had been set up. I squeezed Mrs. Opaline's hand, my voice shaking with urgency. "Can you come to the precinct with me? Your testimony could save Kwesi." He didn't hesitate. "Of course, honey. For Kwesi. I love him like a grandson." I grabbed the car keys and she climbed into the passenger seat. We left our familiar street behind, the one where we had lived in peace for decades. I tried calling Zuri while driving but she didn't answer, likely busy in the lab. As we entered the main avenue, a white truck with no markings appeared from a side street, speeding toward us. Its headlights blinded me. I heard Mrs. Opaline scream and the sickening crunch of metal. Everything went black. I woke up to the harsh smell of disinfectant, pain slicing through my head and white hospital lights stabbing my eyes. My arm had an four and Zuri stood over me, her face tense, no longer calm. "You're awake," she said, her tone grave. "It's a mild concussion and some bruises." I croaked, my throat dry. "Mrs. Opaline, will she be okay?" Zuri paused and that single silent moment stretched on like forever. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "The woman who was with you, she didn't survive," Zuri said quietly. "The truck fled the scene and we're searching for it." "I'm so sorry." My chest felt like it had been crushed. I broke down completely, hot tears streaming, burning my cheeks. Tears of fear, grief for losing such a kind neighbor, and a rage I could barely contain. Between sobs, I told Zuri everything Mrs. Opaline had seen. The man with the scar, the envelope, the widow from Detroit. Zuri placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Vance, do you understand now? These people don't just scam, they kill anyone who knows too much. This fight is no longer only about your son." Her words lit a fire in me. Fear shifted into anger, determination. I wasn't giving up. I would fight for Kwesi and for Mrs. Opaline, the brave neighbor who had paid too high a price for honesty. The next 2 days in the hospital felt endless. The bruises, dizziness, and pain were nothing compared to the mental torment. Zuri visited often, both to update me on the investigation and to ensure my protection. A plainclothes officer stayed at my door day and night. His quiet presence was reassuring, but also a reminder that danger was near. In the moments I was alone, guilt clawed at me. If only I hadn't taken Mrs. Opaline in my car. If only we had been more careful. If only I had called a taxi instead. Thousands of ifs haunted me. On one visit, seeing me frozen in despair, Zuri said firmly, "Mrs. Vance, stop blaming yourself. They were already after her. Maybe they saw her with you. Maybe they were watching the house. It wasn't your fault, it's theirs." Mrs. Opaline's funeral was held while I was still in the hospital. Her son, a quiet man living in another city, called me. He didn't blame me at all. He simply thanked me for being there for his mother in her final moments. That call, soft and sincere, gave me a small sense of comfort amid the storm. I asked Vera to arrange a large wreath of flowers, and on the black ribbon, I wrote with my own hands, "For a brave neighbor, justice will be done." It wasn't just a tribute to Mrs. Opaline. It was a promise I made to myself to see the truth come out. When I was discharged from the hospital, Zuri personally came to pick me up, and as we drove through familiar streets, she shared the first bit of good news. They had traced the truck. The driver had rented it with fake documents but made a critical error. He used a credit card which left a digital trail. Zuri's cybercrimes team followed the trail to an internet cafe on the outskirts of Atlanta, and security footage gave them a clear image of the man. His face matched a profile in the FBI database. Darius Scar Mitchell, a known criminal with a history of assault and extortion, marked by a long scar on his right cheek. Hours later, police raided a low-cost motel where he was hiding. He didn't resist, as if he knew the arrest was coming. Zuri ensured I got home safely before returning to the precinct to lead the interrogation herself. That night she called with the full story. At first he kept repeating the same excuse, claiming it had all been a traffic accident, insisting he didn't know Nia Amani or have any connection to her schemes. He played the frightened truck driver role flawlessly, even under 24 hours of continuous questioning by the most skilled investigators. Nothing worked until Zuri tried a different approach. She returned with photos, printed in color, of the elderly victims Nia Amani had targeted, showing smiling faces, family moments, and grandchildren. The images hit him differently, and Zuri sensed they might be the key to breaking his silence and finally exposing the truth. Zuri laid the photos one by one on the metal table in front of Darius and spoke in a calm voice that carried undeniable weight. She pointed to the first image and explained it was Mrs. Schmidt, an 82-year-old woman from Berlin who lost her entire retirement savings and was forced to leave the home she had lived in all her life. Another photo followed, this time of Mr. Dubois, a 78-year-old widower from France who, after realizing he had lost everything to deception, fell into deep despair and never recovered. Zuri then placed a final photo on top, Mrs. Opaline Chesterton, a warm-hearted neighbor with 3 grandchildren who were waiting for her at home, and explained that her life ended simply because she overheard something she wasn't meant to hear. Looking Darius directly in the eyes, Zuri made the choice clear. Cooperate and name the person truly behind everything, or face the full weight of the law with no mercy and no relief. The silence in the room grew heavy as the clock ticked loudly, until Darius finally lowered his head and broke. He admitted he had been hired by Nia Amani and confirmed he was the man with the scar Mrs. Opaline had seen that night. At first he claimed his task was only to frighten her into silence, but when he realized we were rushing to the police station he panicked and called Nia for instructions, which led everything to spiral further. Then he revealed something no one expected. Nia, always careful, kept what she called insurance, an external hard drive containing a full record of victims, call recordings, money movements, and even private meetings where the voices of the group's leaders could clearly be heard, a final key that could bring the entire operation into the light. She had told him that if anything ever happened to her, the information would be released automatically, which made Zuri press harder and ask where the hard drive was hidden. Darius could only shake his head and admit he didn't know the exact location, explaining that Nia never let it out of her sight because it contained her entire world. He insisted that finding Nia meant finding the drive. Zuri's technical team moved fast, reviewing Darius's recent calls and isolating several unregistered burner numbers that appeared again and again. Tracing one weak signal led them to a remote cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, far from the city and carefully chosen for privacy. A special police unit quietly secured the area and blocked every possible exit. At dawn, Zuri called me and told me they had found her, saying I should be there to see the truth with my own eyes. I was taken to a mobile command van nearby, filled with screens and focus technicians working in silence. The tension was heavy as Zuri handed me headphones and said they had tapped into the signal inside. Moments later, Nia's familiar sharp voice came through, speaking casually about Darius being caught and brushing it off as a minor setback. She laughed and confidently said everything was registered under my son's name, claiming he trusted her completely and was now paying the price while she remained untouched. Hearing her say the hard drive was still with her and safe made my hands tremble, but it also confirmed that the end of this long nightmare was finally close. Those words, "a lovesick fool," hit me like a hammer to the chest. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my skin, and pure anger swept away every ounce of fear. That woman hadn't just ruined my son's life. She had shattered his trust and betrayed his love in the cruelest way imaginable. Zuri caught the fire in my eyes and simply nodded to the SWAT team leader beside her. Over the radio came the sharp, steady command, "All units move in." On the drone feed I watched the tactical team surround the cabin with precise, ghost-like movements. Within moments the front door was broken down, Nia's desperate screams pierced the air, and the sound of breaking furniture echoed briefly. The commander confirmed calmly, "Target secured, external hard drive and phones recovered, zone safe." Nia Imani was brought out in handcuffs, her arrogant composure gone. Her hair was messy, clothes disheveled, and for a fleeting second our eyes met. Hatred burned in hers, but she said nothing as she was driven away into the night. Hours later, armed with the hard drive and her recorded confession, the order to release Kwesi was signed. I rushed to the detention center, and when the heavy metal door creaked open, there he was, thinner, gaunt, beard unkempt, dark circles under his eyes, but alive, no longer hopeless, just hollow. He didn't speak at first, only embraced me with trembling shoulders. I held him tightly, running my hands over his back like I used to when he was a boy. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "I can't believe it, Mama. The person I loved most, the mother of my child, could do this to me. How could I have been so blind?" When we got home, Vera had already brought Galani. The little boy sat quietly on the sofa, his face sad, but the moment he saw Kwesi, his eyes sparkled. "Daddy!" he shouted and ran straight into his father's waiting arms. Kwesi knelt down, hugging him tightly, burying his face in Galani's soft hair. Watching them, I felt the worst nightmare of my life finally lift. But I also knew Kwesi had been changed forever. The pain and betrayal had left a mark that would never fully fade. He looked at me with a new resolve. "It's over," he said firmly. "I'm getting a divorce. I'll fight for full custody of Galani. I won't let him grow up under her influence." Weeks later, on the morning of the first trial, Atlanta's sky was a dull gray. Kwesi, Zuri, and I sat in the front row reserved for witnesses. Kwesi wore a suit, his face still thin and drawn, but his gaze was steady, unshakable. The courtroom was vast and solemn, with oak benches and the national seal behind the judge. Tension filled the air. Journalists crowded the back, cameras trained like rifles on the accused. Nia Imani, the center of a massive fraud case with ties to murder, was about to face justice. When the side doors opened, 2 officers escorted her in. She wore a loose gray prison uniform, her hair hastily pulled back, her pale face bowed, avoiding any eye contact. Darius Scar Mitchell and the other accomplices were seated beside her, Darius's scar under the bright lights looking even more menacing. When I was called as the first witness, all eyes turned to me. I placed my hand on the Bible, took a deep breath, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, firm and sharp, asked about life with Nia, about the signs I had ignored in my innocence. I recounted everything: the secret night calls, the luxury items far beyond her income, and that chilling instruction to use Kwesi's account to make the money look cleaner. When I calmly explained how Detective Zuri and I uncovered the hidden drawer, the black velvet pouch, and the notebooks filled with the names of elderly victims, the courtroom went completely quiet, and I could sense the shock spreading among everyone present. Nia Imani's defense lawyer tried to weaken my statement by suggesting I was biased and had never truly accepted my daughter-in-law, implying I was exaggerating to protect my son. I met his gaze without hesitation and answered steadily that I had once loved Nia like my own child and felt proud of her, but love could not invent dozens of foreign SIM cards, detailed lists of seniors drained of their savings, or photographs linking her to internationally wanted criminals. A low murmur rippled through the room, and the attorney had no further questions. Over the following days, the data recovered from the external drive was presented, each piece stronger than the last, leaving no room for doubt. Audio recordings were played, and Nia's own confident voice filled the courtroom, clearly outlining plans, money movements, and careless remarks that exposed the entire operation. When it was finally her turn to speak, many expected excuses or denial, but instead she gave a full confession in a flat, detached tone, explaining that a failed investment years earlier had left her buried in debt and under serious pressure. She claimed she was offered help and financial security in exchange for cooperation, believing at first it would involve only small tasks. Step by step, she admitted she became deeply involved, describing how fake websites and online messages were used to target isolated seniors, a story that left the courtroom heavy with silence and disbelief. When the prosecutor asked why Nia Amani had chosen her own husband Kwesi Vance as the scapegoat, she finally turned her gaze toward us, cold and empty without any trace of remorse. "I needed the perfect replacement," she said steadily. "Someone with a clean record, no criminal history, living abroad to make tracking difficult, and above all, someone who trusted me completely and would sign anything I gave him." Kwesi had all that. I could see my son's fists tighten until his knuckles turned white, and I placed my hand gently over his in silent support. After several tense days, the judge finally read the verdict aloud, every word echoing through the courtroom. Nia Amani Vance was sentenced to 25 years in prison for leading a structured fraud operation, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and complicity in the involuntary manslaughter of Mrs. Opaline Chesterton. Darius Mitchell, who had cooperated with authorities, received 10 years, and the other accomplices were sentenced to 5 to 15 years each. Justice, delayed but decisive, had been done. As Nia was led past Kwesi and she shared a single icy glance, her eyes empty and terrifying, his calm but resolute, showing no trace of past love or pain. The past finally closed its door. We stepped outside, and for the first time in weeks the sun broke through the clouds, forcing us to squint, a quiet reminder that the storm had passed. A few months later we sold the Atlanta house. It was impossible to stay. Every room held both false happiness and real pain, from Nia's office, a scar in the heart of the home, to the living room where Kwesi had been arrested. That house, once our refuge, had died for us, leaving only memories and a path forward. That we settled in a quiet coastal town in the Carolinas, where the air smells of salt and the sound of waves brings a calm that heals the soul. We bought a small white house with sky-blue window frames and a little garden bursting with hydrangeas and lavender. Kwesi handled the divorce swiftly, and Nia Amani, now in prison, didn't fight for custody or appeal. She had vanished from the life she had destroyed. My son gained full custody of Galani, and with the money from selling our Atlanta home and part of my savings, I finally fulfilled a long-time dream, opening a small bakery called Serenity Sweet. Every morning before the town wakes, the kitchen fills with the scent of flour, butter, cinnamon, and melted chocolate. Measuring, kneading, shaping, and waiting for breads and pastries has become a kind of therapy for me, each task calming my mind and bringing joy in creating something that makes others happy. Serenity Sweet quickly became a favorite spot, fishermen grabbing a warm pastry before heading out to sea, children rushing in after school for chocolate chip cookies, and neighbors stopping by for a morning treat. Kwesi also started anew. He stayed in the town, leaving London behind, and took a job at a small interior design workshop. It didn't pay as much as before, but it gave him what mattered most: time with his family. Every afternoon at 4:30 he left work to pick up Galani from school, often walking along the beach together, holding hands, building giant sandcastles and watching the waves wash them away. In the evenings he patiently read stories of brave knights and kind princesses, embracing both fatherly and motherly roles with all his love and tenderness. Sometimes in quiet moments, Galani still asked about his mother, and the questions pierced our hearts. "Grandma, where's my mommy? Why doesn't she come back to Daddy and me?" Kwesi never lied. He hugged his son close and said softly, "Mommy made a mistake, son. She's far away now trying to make things right. But never forget, she loves you very much." Life was slowly mending, piece by piece, and despite the scars, hope and love filled the spaces left behind. One Sunday, as I was arranging fresh sweet potato pies on the bakery shelves, a family car pulled up, and out stepped Zuri, no uniform this time, just a simple floral dress, looking relaxed and radiant. "Captain Banks!" I exclaimed, rushing to hug her. She had been promoted after solving the case. She brought a beautiful model pirate ship for Galani, and we settled in the small garden behind the bakery under a pergola covered in blooming vines, sipping coffee and enjoying warm pastries. The press called her a heroine, but she smiled and shook her head. "The real heroine is you, Miss Odora," she said. Without your faith in Kwesi, your courage in the face of danger, he might still be in prison and Nia Imani could still be out there hurting more people. Just then Kwesi and Galani returned from the beach, sand in their hair and sun on their faces. Galani ran over to show Zuri a shiny shell he had found. Watching them, seeing my son's genuine smile for the first time in months, my heart was full of warmth and gratitude. That night, after closing the bakery, I stayed in the kitchen cleaning, looking through the window at Kwesi pushing Galani on the swing, their laughter blending with the sound of the distant sea and the lingering smell of baked treats. I realized that love and trust alone are not always enough to protect those we care about. Blind trust can be dangerous if we ignore warning signs. Justice and truth do not appear on their own. We have to seek them courageously, even if it means stepping into darkness and facing the most ruthless. Life had taught me that lesson. Did you enjoy the story? Where are you listening from? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you liked it, you can support me with a super thanks so I can bring more stories like this. Thank you for your support. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the 2 new life stories on the screen. I promise there's so much more waiting for you. See you in the next story with love and respect.